Okay, so we've created user repository, and now we should be able to save at least hard-coded user details into a database. So let's go into user service implementation class, and we will make use of user entity, and we'll make use of user repository to put it all together and to save our first user details into a database. So I'll go to user service implementation class, and this class takes in user DTO. I will need to take user DTO and copy some of its information into user entity class. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create an instance of user entity calls new user entity, and let me import user entity. And now I will use binutils to copy information which is stored in user DTO into a user entity object. So I will use binutils to copy properties from user to user entity. Okay, and once again, for this to work, the fields in user DTO, these fields like user ID, first name, last name, they must match the fields in the user entity, user ID, first name, last name, email address, and so on. Okay, so let's go back to user service implementation. And now once we have user entity populated with some information, we are ready to save it into a database, which means we will need to make use of user repository. And we will Autowire user repository to our user service implementation. And I will add this as a class field, user repo, and I will import user repository and annotate it with add autowired, like this. Now I can make use of it. I will use user repository, and now when I look into this object, see, I already have some of the methods that have been implemented for me, and I can use it. Like for example, delete user, which accepts user entity, and this method has been already implemented for me, and it will delete record. Delete all, which will delete all records, and find all, which will find all records in our database table called users, and then will return user entity. So what I need to do, I will need to call a save method, which will take user entity and it will save it to a database. We will also assign the return value to user entity, and we will call it stored user details, and we will return this information back to our REST controller. So I'll create a return value of user DTO type equals new user DTO, and now I will use binutils to copy properties from stored user details into a return value. And I'm ready to return the return value. Now, a very important moment here is that if we go to user entity, some of the fields have been marked as required. For example, encrypted password cannot be null, and then email cannot be null. And we will need to provide this information if we want this record to be stored in a database. So let me go to user service implementation, and at this moment hard code these details. So I will copy user entity, paste it here, and now I will set encrypted password to test, and the rest I think we can pass in with the JSON payload. Let me look at the user entity one more time. So first name will come with the JSON, last name will come with the JSON, encrypted password will need to be generated, we are hard coding it. This one is not a required field. This one has a default value of false, so very good. We will also need to provide a value of user ID, since this value will also need to be generated inside of this create user method. We will need to generate an alphanumeric public user ID. So for now, I will simply hard code it. I'll call set and set user ID into test user ID. So we should be able to now run this application and send it an HTTP post request and see if we can store value successfully. And once everything is okay and is working, we will continue and learn how to encrypt user password and also how to generate the public user ID, which is going to be an alphanumeric string of characters. So let's continue to the next video.